Hello and welcome to another episode of It Could Only Happen on Earth, the show where we look at some of the most bizarre, strange, and truly head-scratching encounters from around the world. I'm Marcus Lowth, and joining me as does every week is our co-host and my good friend Paul Seaburn. Paul, it's going to be another fascinating show. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Marcus. I'm glad to hear that you're doing good as well. It's a beautiful day in Ohio in the U.S. We are, and so many things are happening here that that I'll be talking about. So it's a great place to be in almost the center of the paranormal world, um, at least for a day.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely.
So
So, I
yeah,
mean,
let's get right to it.
yeah, let's delve straight in. I agree. Now, okay, Paul, what Bigfoot? It's been causing a bit of havoc in the Bigfoot community. Some recent news. Tell us about this because this is
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Well, this is, as I said, I live in Northeast Ohio, around in the Cleveland area. And for the past week or so, we have been, like the Bigfoot Palooza of North America. Uh, we had eight Bigfoot sightings in a 5 day period. So that's unusual for Washington State and Pennsylvania, all the other hotspots. Really unusual. Almost impossible to imagine in Ohio, and yet um, they were there. And it's one of those things. They were in a band of green space between Cleveland and Akron, which is a little south of Cleveland. They started from the west, which many people believe the Sasquatch may have been migrating from Michigan. So they would come down south from Michigan, get about a third of the way into Ohio, hang a left, I think that would be, and head east, and then come right through in between Cleveland and Akron. I live very near the Cuyahoga Valley National Park, and one of number of the sightings were in that area. So this is an area where if you're a big Bigfoot believer, there's plenty of the things that a Sasquatch would be looking for. There's water, there's places to hide, there's food, there's deer, there's vegetation. So whatever variation of Bigfoot you prescribe to, there's place for them in Ohio. So and it's also right where they went, right past it, and this is within not quite walking distance from my house, but less than a 5 minute drive. The place where the second best Bigfoot howl was ever recorded, and that's again in the area that these some of the eight sightings were took place. The So Google Bigfoot Howl, Ohio, and you'll find out all about it rather than trying to explain all that. The sightings were covered by the local media, which I love because you and I have discussed this before. It's a the Bigfoot is becoming an accepted thing now. So for the media to cover it, even though they did it with kind of a grin and a little poked fun at it, and maybe poked fun at the people who were out there looking and believing. Nonetheless, it was covered extensively in Ohio, also by the national media. It even showed up on late night talk shows. So the comedians were actually doing jokes about the Bigfoot sightings in Ohio. So even if you were not aware of it and you were just looking for entertainment, all of a sudden Bigfoot is in your life. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Um, One of the sightings was a creek near my house. It's called Tinker's Creek, which has my favorite barbecue restaurant. Just happens to be on the shores of Tinker's Creek. So people were talking about Bigfoot stopping by for some really good barbecue. It also The sightings were very near a place where I play poker once a month, and my friend's house overlooks the valley, and the room that we were in had windows on three sides. So while we're playing poker, I'm busy talking about Bigfoot and how we really should be looking. Marcus, I had the best night of poker in my life that night because I had everybody looking out the window,
Absolutely.
hoping to see Bigfoot or fearing that they might see Bigfoot. So most of the sightings, let's get to the meat of the matter. Most of the people said that the Bigfoots that they saw were between 9 and 10 feet tall. A couple were 6 foot, but most were 9 to 10 feet tall. Kind of unusual size for Bigfoot. They varied in colors. Some were brown, some were black. One of them I thought was very unusual. That was one of the smaller ones, a 6 foot one. The witness said that it was very fast. It had a long stride and was very fast. Not something you hear about very often. Um, Two of the accounts mentioned knocking. So the famous Bigfoot knock, where they wrap up a branch up against a tree or a rock, however it is that they do that. Um, Unfortunately, in all of the cases, and this is according to the Bigfoot Society, which is a podcast that pretty much recorded all the witness testimonies. No one was in a position to be actually actively looking for the Bigfoot of the witnesses. So none of them had their phones out or any other recording devices to catch anything. Nonetheless, the Bigfoot uh, Field Research Organization, BFRO, also investigated the earliest one, which was in Mantua, and they said that that particular witness had seen footprints, but again, they didn't make a recording of it. But BFRO is a little more discerning in the Bigfoot reports that they publish on their site. So that was one, I think they gave it a B rating. So not their top of the line, really good footprints and broken branches sort of thing. The So nonetheless, the Bigfoot sightings occurred in 5 days. Very intense coverage here to show you how Bigfoot has jumped into the mainstream. Right after these sightings, there's a minor league baseball team, the Mahoning Valley Scrappers, which is in the path heading towards Pennsylvania. So this is directly in the path of where they're walking. The Bigfoot, the Mahoning Valley Scrappers announced that on June 11th, they will change their name to the Mahoning Valley Grassmen, which happens to be the name that Ohio gives to their version of the Bigfoot, because the Native Americans believe that these piles of grass that they saw in the forest were signs of either Bigfoot bedding or a Bigfoot living space. So it became known as the Grassman. So they got hats, they got jerseys, they got all kind of great stuff. But who knows? Maybe if they lure one out, they can suit them up and have them play a couple of innings. The so I would say this is a good time for there to be more believers in Bigfoot. And unfortunately, the timing couldn't be worse. And I know you've seen this. I know many of the people who are fans of our show have seen this. The famous Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967, the ultimate film of Bigfoot, the one that started the whole Bigfoot, craze, is being questioned by a new documentary. And the man who did the documentary, Mark Evans is his name, is calling that Patterson-Gimlin film of a hoax, because he found another film from the same time period by associated, not directly, but indirectly associated with Patterson. And this particular film looks like it's in the same general area. It's a thinner Bigfoot, 47 seconds of a thinner Bigfoot walking through what looked like the same area. So he interviewed a bunch of people. He interviewed Bob Hieronymus, who is now 80 years old. He may have passed away since the documentary came out. He claims that he was the guy in the fake Bigfoot suit. Patterson's son, Clint, came out and he admitted that to the documentary that his mother told him that it was a hoax. And the reason why the father did it, Patterson, is because he knew he was dying. He died shortly after the film came out. and he knew it would be, he believed in Bigfoot, but he knew that this would be worth a lot of money to the family, and they could use it to fund their, their lifestyles while when he was gone. Um, so Clint said that before he died, his father burned the suit, which is why there's no suit. Um, so, needless to say, Marcus, this is all of the Bigfoot researchers and the Bigfoot believers and the people in our business are upset. This is 50 years worth of staunch believers and research. So that film has been analyzed. I heard somebody say more than the grassy knoll films from the Kennedy assassination. So it's like
Mm.
this is unbelievable. This is really tearing the Bigfoot world apart. I've seen some researchers saying, "Well, we're going to wait. The new film has not been verified. It hasn't. Filmmakers haven't looked at it, and we got all this artificial intelligence nonsense going on. I'm sure it's being accused of being doctored in some way." The only thing I can say in wrapping it up is, I always look for evidence, and there's no evidence either way that either one of these is valid or invalid. But I would like to see more research done on the film, possibly some non-involved researchers talk to some of the people that were in the documentary, and let's get a better feel for it. It could go towards the hoax area, but it could also strengthen strengthen our basket of evidence that Bigfoot may truly exist. So, has all this made the news in your side of the pond?
Yeah, I mean, not so much in the mainstream news, but it's certainly done the rounds. And anyone who's got an interest in Bigfoot has felt the need to comment on this. And before we get into that, I just want to, you mentioned a restaurant near where some of these recent Bigfoot sightings.
Yeah.
They need to get on this. They need to come out with like a monster steak, something big enough to feed a Bigfoot. They need to like tap into this, because if they're showing up there, I would be. I'm a big fan of local businesses tapping into events and things. So monster steak. I'm gonna when we finish this, give me their details and I'll approach them. We'll have the money for it if they take it. But yeah, the actual footage. Now, yeah, everybody's got an opinion on this, and what I find strange, more than if the footage is fake or not, or hoaxed or whatever, is a friend of mine put a post on his social media, and he basically said, to paraphrase him, everybody just needs to calm down, because he went on to say that we can't treat Bigfoot and belief they're in or not belief in as a religion. We can't take offense and start saying, well, no, and we're going to defend this like we defend believing in a God. We need to go where the evidence takes us. And I thought that was the most reasonable response that I've read over the last week or so. Because as you say, I've got people who are really quite, I would say, aggressive almost in like denouncing this. And I'm not saying that I believe that the guy is correct. I mean, and I say what little, I've done quite a little bit of reading on it, but I've not really delved in. But it does seem that some of the testimony can be easily debunked by. Is it Gimlin who is still alive? And he's always stood by that this is an authentic piece of footage. Time will tell. I've not seen the documentary, and I say I'm not really delved into it. But I would say there's as much for proving this to be, there's as much fame and possibly money for proving this is a hoax as there will be for proving it's real. So, I'm not saying the guy's inauthentic or disingenuous, but the guy who's made this film will have a bit of a stake in this too. I do think it looks incredibly realistic to me. The notion that it's just some guy in a suit, it could be, and I'm not saying that I'm going to stand here and defend it if the evidence shows that's what it is, and that is what it is. And that doesn't mean that Bigfoot isn't real either. It just means that somebody got one over on those people. Right. So, yeah, ultimately, Paul, it's going to be interesting to see where this takes us. But yeah, I agree with my friend who's done a bit of research in this, that we just need to calm down a little bit and just see what comes up from this, because it really has got people riled, as you say. It's interesting stuff, though.
Very, very interesting. And I agree. Calm down. I tell people it's good to believe in something. And if the Bigfoot is what you want to believe in, that's fine. But still look for some evidence to strengthen your belief, not necessarily to ruin your belief. So yeah, I agree with your friend. I hope that that we do get that information and get it fairly soon. I think that would be nice. So I wish everybody the best of luck, because everybody's got a stake in making money on this. So the baseball team, the restaurant, I like that as well. So let's move on to something completely out of the ordinary, completely out of somewhat out of the paranormal world, with the story that you have for us next.
Yeah, well, this is if you remember a few weeks ago, we spoke about the chap who said he teleported into a stolen car right before he got arrested, which was a fantastic story, and we'll just take a moment to realize how fantastic that actually was. However, recently there's been more claims of teleportation, and this isn't coming from somebody who stole a car or someone else probably living the wrong life, if you like, if that's how you want to put it. This has come from a FEMA official. The guy's name is Greg Phillips, and he works for the Office of Response and Recovery. Now, he went on a podcast, and he basically said, in all seriousness, that he's found himself being involuntarily teleported to various places. And this has happened on several occasions. He spoke about one time he was on his way to buy food. Didn't say, if he was working or if he was at home. He was on his way to buy food. And all of a sudden, he found himself at a Waffle House in Rome, Georgia, which was about 50 miles from where he was. And he stressed that this wasn't some kind of blackout. It's not something that he just realized, he woke up and he was there. He said the process itself was really quite terrifying. He doubled down and said, this isn't the only time. He said another time he was driving his car and he felt the entire car being lifted off the road. The next thing he knew, he was like in a ditch outside the church. Again, like considerable amount of distance from his home. Now we won't get too much into what kind of chap Greg Phillips is. It's controversial, and we'll leave it at that. In general, politically, he's made a few statements. It's been connected to possible voter fraud or knowing about it. But his claims coming from somebody so high ranking, it's really made people sit up and think, this is really interesting. This is some guy just going off on one, or he's got something to say. Now, we've mentioned about teleportation cases for real in the past. We spoke about a chap who left his hotel and he teleported hundreds of miles to the other side of the country. But the fact is, there's more teleportation cases on record than we might think. Hundreds of years ago, there was in the early 1600s, there was a case of a young woman. She was a nun, and she claimed, she disappeared for several weeks, and then she showed up again, and she claimed that she had taught a tribe in an unknown land, Christianity, and she developed them, and etc., etc. They dismissed her claims. The other people at the nunnery, she was essentially, incarcerated in the church, really. But then when a father who had been out on a mission, he returned from somewhere in South America. His intent was to develop this tribe and introduce Christianity to them. And he said when he got there, his work had already been done. And this tribe spoke of a woman who had just seemingly arrived out of nowhere and told them all about Christianity, and had already converted. The descriptions, though, that they gave were almost identical to the lady who had gone missing. And so that's one historical case. There was another case, again, this is in Argentina, South America, actually, where there was a young girl who was playing outside with her friends, and they were witnesses to this. And they said 1 minute she was there, the next minute she just disappeared. Now, as you can imagine, the parents are going to be out of their minds with worry. Several hours later, they get a phone call from a police station, again, on the other side of the country, saying, we've got a young girl here, and we believe it's your daughter. They didn't even know she was missing at that point. And it was. The girl went on to say that she saw some kind of mist develop around her. And then when she came to, or the mist disappeared, she was in a square in a city that she'd never been to before in her life. And again, this is like factually backed up in newspaper reports. Now, whether that happened or not, who knows? But it was certainly covered by the press. So I guess, what do we make of these claims? Do we take them at face value? Because it's not like the guy's talking about something that other people haven't claimed before. Or is it a sign that someone, quite high up in the scheme of things, maybe isn't as sound mentally as maybe he should be? So I found it really interesting, though, that this teleportation is coming up again. So, I mean, I'm not sure if you've heard about this story, Paul. I mean, it just intrigued me.
Some of them, some of those stories are familiar, and I've written many stories about teleportation myself. Two things of interest here, and those are really good. The the case of missing persons. We have a big missing person case going on in the United States right now. The mother of a television personality, I keep thinking about these missing person cases. We have a lot that are cold cases where people disappear and you don't find them again. Maybe there's a link. There might be a link between teleportation and these missing person cases. Technically, that's what they both are. Perhaps there should be some information sharing between the believers or the researchers in both cases to see, we might be missing something here. Be hard for the police and the investigators to admit that something is a missing person went into a portal somewhere. But hey, you haven't solved it yet. Open yourself up to the possibilities. So I like that. I think we should be studying more of these teleportation cases. We just might resolve some mysteries and open up some more. The other one, though, is the first case, the one at the Waffle House. I know you've been to the States. Have you ever been to a Waffle House?
No, I haven't. I'll be honest. No.
You haven't been drunk enough. That's why.
Right.
Okay. The Waffle House is a pancake restaurant. Serves breakfast 24 hours a day. Open. Never closes. That's their reputation. It never closes. Hurricanes, tornadoes, alien invasions, you name it. They never close. So if a portal were to, someone from another dimension or another civilization were to look for a place to open a portal, you couldn't pick a better place than Waffle House because it's always open. And because everybody in there is either drunk or recovering from a hangover, it would be easy. It might be easier to convince them to come into the porthole, tell them that it'll help your headache. It might also help convince them that this is really happening. So I just thought that was what a place to pick, a Waffle House of all places. So yeah, interesting, and FEMA was involved too. That's kind of interesting. A government agency. We're gonna talk about some other issues where government agencies are unexpectedly becoming involved. And that's a United States agency. Normally it's in South America in particular. It seems like the government gets involved. And you guys over in the UK, particularly with the UFOs, you have a much greater interest, it seems, within your government in unidentified objects than we do here in the States. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about those kinds of stories. That sounds like we've tapped into something here.
Yeah, I think you're right there. And I think just from the Waffle House point of view, it would be a hell of a business plan to have people portal into the premises.
Again.
I mean, you're going to have other fast food chains tapping into that. Regarding the Waffle House, the only equivalent I can think of in the United Kingdom, it would be a kebab house. It's renowned, it's not actually that bad, but it's renowned for people eating it, like you say, when they've had a night on the beer and it's just something you grab as you're going home. So yeah. Possibly that's the equivalent there. But yeah, we definitely need to be researching teleportation cases. And I know it's people, you don't want to make light of people disappearing or reduce it, neither of us do. But as you say, the fact is, there's people disappear every year and they're not found. I mean, people assume that at the very worst, you'll find, a body, but they're just disappear into thin air. And a lot of these cases, particularly in the States, they seem to happen around national parks. I know there's loads of predators around, loads of things that could get them, but in the same places, Bigfoot sightings and the same hotspots as UFOs. So there could be a paranormal aspect to that. But speaking of paranormal aspects to things, Paul, I mean, I wouldn't quite call it a monster of the week, but it's pretty close. I mean, your next story is, Chupacabras in Argentina. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's Chupacabra has a bad reputation in the United States. It's not anyone's favorite cryptid by any stretch of the imagination, as opposed to Bigfoot or the Loch Ness monster and some of the other ones. But it's on its way up, I think. The the there are even sports teams in the United States named for the chupacabra. So that's a sign that it's gaining in reputation. Not a good sports team. The one that I found, the New Mexico Chupacabras. They're in the American Indoor Football League. NFL style football, not the top level of play. So that they're not very good. The Chupacabras, I think, had one good year, and for the past 5 or 6 years, they've been pretty bad. So they might change their mascot maybe after they hear my story. The so there's still plenty of believers in the two versions of the Chupacabras, and we'll get into that. The scarier version is the one we're talking about first. So this guy, he lives in Sans Peña in northern Argentina. And he swore that recently he witnessed, he actually visually verified, witnessed a chupacabra. What happened was he and his partner are living in a house. They hear a thump on the roof. He doesn't want to go outside because it was and then he heard something like maybe it jumped onto the ground. So he didn't want to go out. He looked out the window, and in the twilight, he could see something that was on two legs, but did not look like a human being. He said it almost looked like a dog moving upright. And so he definitely was not going to go out and investigate it at that time. But he did go out the next morning, and he said that waited until daylight, and he found footprints, and he found, unfortunately, his cat had been killed by something. And the cat had a wound in the genital area, he said, and no blood anywhere. So, that's always suspicious. Especially when you're talking about something whose name means bloodsucker.
Yeah.
So this guy was smart. And unfortunately, he didn't take a picture of the footprint. But what he did was he wrapped the cat in rags before burying it. And he said he wanted it to stay clean in case someone wanted to investigate it. And this is what I was talking about. So he talked to a local reporter. He puts it out on social media. And 2 days later, he gets contacted by a very unusual organization, the Center for the Study of UFO Phenomenon in the Argentine Republic. So they contacted him, found out where he lived. 2 days later, they send representatives out who exhume the body and take it away. They looked for other evidence. He said they were looking for hair, they were looking for feathers, so anything else that might indicate what the other animal or creature might be, and sent them away for analysis. So of course, we don't have the results of that yet as of today. But this is an area where the chupacabra, the classic blood-sucking chupacabra, has been rumored for some time. Fairly recently, in February of this year, farmers in the same area were finding dead cows, and again, with precise incisions made into them, but no bleeding around any of the incision. And then, the chupacabra is getting some press. And as I'm doing some research, I find out that the National Geographic Society, a very reputable organization for well over 100 years and a very well-respected magazine, they did a recent investigation into the chupacabra of all things. Not an elephant but a cryptid. So they noted that it was the original chupacabra story comes from Puerto Rico, and we have good friends, both of us, who have gone to Puerto Rico and investigated it. I think there was the original sighting or the first talk of it was in 1975, but the big chupacabra burst of information came in 1995. when people started reporting that they saw a bipedal creature, 3 feet tall, covered with gray hair, spikes out of its back. That was the defining factor there. And these were typically ranchers. They were finding sheep, dead sheep, no blood. So that's where the name, that's where you would think the name came from.
Yeah.
But the person who first coined the term chupacabra to describe this cryptid was a comedian in Puerto Rico who was talking about it in his act, and he wanted an unusual name. So he came up with the chupacabra name. Now, the National Geographic did their due diligence, and right at the same time, there was a movie out called Sill, based on a creature. Oh, the film was called Species, and in the movie Species, there was a species that looked very suspiciously like what the chupacabra that people were describing. Again, with this particular chupacabra, and I've covered chupacabra sightings all over the world, they're rarely seen. It's always a dead animal, no blood, maybe some howling. Rarely are there any footprints. So it's an extremely mysterious, hard to prove cryptid, except in Texas. Now, in Texas, there's a different form of chupacabra. People call this thing a chupacabra. You've seen the pictures. It looks like a skinny dog with no hair, or maybe a skinny coyote with no hair. Hint, hint. That's what the National Geographic thinks it is. They went to Texas. They investigated some of these creatures that have been captured. Most of them turn out to be coyotes that are sick and suffering from mange. And there's a bacteria that infects them, and they've looked at that, and it can cause unusual behavior. So all of that fits in with the looks. They lose weight, so their teeth are more pronounced. They look like they're spaced out, and also they eat animals because they're desperate. So what they normally wouldn't eat, sheep or cats or something like that, they'll go after that because they're just desperate for food. So I hate to even report on stories like that because it's kind of obvious what it is, especially if there's photographs. But the guy in Argentina, on the other hand, now we've got something meaty to sink our teeth into, so to speak, on the chupacabra. So one final thing that the National Geographic pointed out that I had completely forgotten, and that is that also in 1995 in Puerto Rico, they were doing experiments on rhesus monkeys. And, and rhesus monkeys, you see them run, they run on their hind legs. They're 2 feet, maybe 3 feet tall on a good day, the taller ones. And they were being used for blood experiments on Puerto Rico. So some people were saying that the actual chupacabra that was predominant in 1995 could have been escaped rhesus monkeys. I don't know. I think that, but I like good, solid stories like this about chupacabra sightings, and I think I hope we can find out some more information on them. If it would be great if we could do a follow-up. I keep my eyes open for these things and what they found when they examined the cat in the area, especially since, again, Marcus, the UFO phenomenon investigation group of the Argentine government. I come back to that again. Governments around the world outside of the major powers are very serious about these types of phenomenon, both on the cryptid side, on the paranormal side, on the UFO side. What do they know that we don't?
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting why there's a connection between chupacabras and UFO. I mean, I know there's been numerous cases in South America, Brazil, Argentina, all over, really, of strange objects in the trees, and they've resulted in deaths and sometimes with like a loss of blood and things of that nature. But it is interesting because, I mean, I was going to bring up, excuse me, as you say, the numerous pieces of footage and photographs of what are clearly diseased coyotes and wolves or anything like that. It's clearly that's what it is. And I think there's a danger, though, that people will look at that and, as you say, blanket all of the sightings as just diseased coyotes. Now, that to me is just a case of somebody just jumped the gun, they've seen something that's a little bit strange, and they thought, oh, that's what it is. It's something, paranormal, it's a chupacabra. But as you say, I mean, you could possibly class them, put them all under that blanket if it wasn't for the blood, the lack of blood, because some of these cases they're completely drained, and I can't think of anything in nature that does that and does that quickly. I mean, you'll know because you say you've wrote about this before, but there's reports of not just singular animals, entire, like chicken pens where they're all just being drained of blood, and so to me, what I immediately start thinking of is, one, is there a paranormal edge to this creature? Is it just appearing out of nowhere, like some people say Bigfoot does? It's luck, and it's the fact that it can get onto two legs, just like a dog man, which again is just a modern way of naming a werewolf, essentially. And so, I mean, it brings up connections to the cat mutilation cases. Now, I know that they started in the 60s with Snippy was the first recognised, what we suspect would be a mutilation that we don't know who or what did that to her. But they kind of took off in the late 70s, around about the same time as chupacabras are recognised, And we have them in England, the United Kingdom, and Europe as well. Strangely enough, it's not always cattle. There's plenty of cases of sheep that have been drained of blood, and even horses. And again, the same theories circulate that it's some kind of satanic cult, or things like that. People just wanting to get an edge on rivals, in particularly with horses, well, any cattle really. They're worth a lot of money. But it just doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be something much more inexplicable and profound there. So, the fact that UFO people are looking into this and there's some kind of connection, to me, I would be expanding that search out and taking into account all of these cat mutilation cases, because I know some people say, well, it's the work of UFOs or it's government agencies or aliens or whatever. But when you've got something in South America, which is essentially delivering the same results, if want of a better phrase, you think, well, maybe this thing's operating much wider than the South American continent. It's really interesting. And as you say, I think because of those sightings of diseased coyotes, it's almost, even with people within our little circle, the paranormal circle, kind of dismissed them, I think, because they don't want to be associated with that. So it's a shame. And I would like to see more research into this, because it could not only wrap up what chupacabras are and where they come from, if indeed they are real, it could possibly get us closer to understanding what cat mutilations are and why they're happening, and what's the agenda behind that. So, I hope we do. We should follow this, Bob, actually.
What a big database is better than a small database. And artificial intelligence, for all of the bad press that it's getting, a big database fed into artificial intelligence can help you see the trends that you may not be seeing when you're working with various smaller databases from different parts of the world, maybe even in different languages. So I'm all for that. Let's get more data, not less. That's the name of the game these days. So speaking of finding more data, there's an awful lot of investigation into the poltergeist and ghost, and I think you've got a story for us now that delves into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, quite often, certainly with UFOs, for example, now we're going to talk about ghosts, but with UFOs, Bigfoot, anything strange, so the first question is, have you got a picture of it? You got any footage? Right. You got any proof? And more often than not, people don't. And that's, let's be fair, that's understandable. If you're confronted with something which is out of the ordinary, most people, and I include myself in that, wouldn't automatically reach for my phone. I think I'd be just like, I want to see what's happening. However, recently in one of the national newspapers in the United Kingdom, not only do we have a claim of a young lady who claims she's seen a ghost, she manages to capture footage of it, and so we've got several still frames, and I'll flash those up as I'm speaking. So the lady in question, she's called Louise Lenton. Now, the picture was taken in 2018, but it's only just kind of come to the forefront over the last few weeks. And she was saying that she was she had taken her son to practice riding his bike, and she did this outside a 19th century building called Oldway Mansion. That's in Penton in Devon. And the reason she chose this is because the area in front of the building is particularly flat. So her little boy, who's only 5 years old, he could, we had the full run of this place. He could just practice his bike. He was safe. There's no traffic. And that's what she was doing. And obviously, she was filming this for obvious reasons, just for herself. However, she noticed that in one of the windows, there was a woman dressed in what she said was clearly Victorian style clothing. And she was watching her little boy. And, not just like looking, she was literally watching what he was doing. And so she's filmed this, and we've got still frames of it. And it really is quite fascinating. She took the picture to the local authorities because although the building isn't abandoned, there should be nobody in there, nobody at all. And they confirmed that on the day and the date, that footage was captured, there should be nobody but basic security guard. And these guys are big burly men, not little old ladies dressed in Victorian clothing. Unless there's something going on in there that we don't know about, and they've just been caught red-handed. We don't know about that. But yeah, right. It's a fascinating picture. And it does appear to be one that has actually captured a ghost. Now, we could dedicate an entire show to pictures that have allegedly captured ghosts, and we could spend 10 minutes on each one of those, and we still won't get through them all. But there has been a few in the past. There was a famous one of I think it's an elderly gentleman in the back of a car that's being driven, and it was his car. There's the famous one of I believe a squadron. I don't know if it's a British squadron or an American squadron, Air Force squadron. And there was a picture taken of them all, and one of the servicemen who had passed away is captured in the back of that photograph. And again, I'll flash these up so people can look at them. But it started making me think, well, people go on about evidence, and in terms of ghosts at least, we probably have more evidence of these things than people want to admit. And then I started thinking, well, why? Why is it that they're captured in photographs or video footage, sometimes even in reflections? Like if you have a mirror or even just a piece of glass, and you'll just see something there, and you turn it, it's not there. So why is that? Is it something to do with the way we perceive things, the way we perceive light, molecules, etc., that it only comes up on film? And so that's an area of study in itself that we should really be concentrating more on. It's okay saying, well, this photograph's authentic, it does show an anomaly. Well, why? Why does it show an anomaly? Why is it showing up there, but we can't see it? So that's something I'd like more research to be done on. But then I also started thinking, and I've got one of those minds which, what if, and I can amuse myself all night. But I started thinking, how many pictures do we take? Because it's one thing if everyone gets together and you take a picture of it, on holiday or something like that, and then that there's nobody behind you. You can remember that there was only you guys there. But then sometimes you're taking a picture in, say, at a football match or a concert, and there's people everywhere. So how do you know that all those people are actually there when you took that photograph? There could just be a ghost that's dressed in modern day clothing. I say this all the time as well to people, that when you're walking down the street, unless you physically go around touching everybody, how do you know those guys are here? How do you know that a ghost doesn't just walk straight past you? So it just got me thinking, what if? Which maybe isn't a good thing. I don't know. I'll have to have some reflection on that. But yeah, it's a fascinating image. And I think what I ultimately took away from it, Paul, is we've got more proof than I think people give people credit for in terms of capturing these spooky images on film. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, but yeah, I think we need to be going back through our photographs, Paul, to be honest with
you. Well, Marcus, please don't drive yourself crazy first. You're close to it, so as am I. Everyone in this business.
Too right about that.
Couple of things. You people in the UK, you can't throw a stone without hitting a haunted building. So it's accepted that you're going to see more, and you have a longer history of those types of buildings, and the people who could eventually haunt those buildings. However, the thing that you triggered is when you mentioned photographs. When I talk about a photograph, I talk about film. That's the way I think of a photograph. A photograph is film in the camera, whereas now we talk about images. And to me, an image is a digital image of something rather than film. One of the things that's happening, Marcus, is that as we're using the phones, and we've been making fun of people not being able to get their phones out in time. People don't get their cameras out in time either. However, the intelligence that's being built into the phones now is self-correcting and self-editing of the images. So I've seen it all the time where I get an image of something, and you've probably seen it. All of a sudden, it starts changing. It gets less blurry. The colors might change as the artificial intelligence in the camera tries to make it better for the dumb masses who don't know how to use a camera and know anything about film speed and lighting and that sort of thing. We may be losing our ability to take the pictures of things that really do exist, as you said. I've seen them in my writings. The very clear images in a window that everybody swears there's no way anyone could get in or out of this particular building. Big burly people that you would believe. So I hope that's not the path that we're heading down, because you're right. I didn't think of it that way, but there is more evidence for ghosts and poltergeists and spirits, especially of the physical images, than in virtually anything else in the cryptid world, at least. So good story. I hope that we people, fortunately, film is coming back. So with film coming back, maybe the ghost investigators could lead the way and say, look, it's much better for our business, and much better, it's not as easy to alter the images when they're on film, which I truly do believe. Good story. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really thought of that actually. Well, I mean, I know there's a difference between film and digital, but I've never really thought of the implications of that. The self-correcting things, and so again, that would be another thing to study. I think pictures on film and images, as you say, digital, because if we say, we've mentioned before about paranormal and electrical energies and things like that, so there could be a way that they can interact with digital photography in a way that they simply can't interact with things on film, and that could be perhaps why they're captured on film. So yeah, I think ultimately we need to, again, like you said, the AI is out there to do this. Data. There's many pictures in there, and we need people looking at this stuff. And I know it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, people need to do this, but we really do, because the answers are there to be found. Yeah. Speaking of data, Paul, I mean, next story that we've got here, this is an interesting one, because I think there's a lot of people that really like this guy, and certainly in the UFO community, because he was really quite open. Tell us about Jimmy Carter's alien briefings, Paul.
Yes, Jimmy Carter was president of the United States from 1976 to 1980, and you're right. If cursory research into Jimmy Carter will take you to him talking about the UFO experience that he had when he was campaigning back in I think it was 1969. So this may have even before he was governor of Georgia, and he made a campaign stop. He was about to give a speech. Someone called him outside to look at something, and he says, we saw a bright object on the horizon, and that bright object, it was the size of the moon, and we saw it moving towards us. We saw it hover over a forest. We saw it change colors. I think he said it changed. It was I think it was orange, then it was blue, then red, then back to white, and then it receded. It went away from them until it disappeared. So multiple witnesses, a credible politician, that an oxymoron, maybe, I don't know.
One of the few, maybe.
He's one of the most trusted, at least, of the presidents that we've had. So not only did he talk about it, but he filed a report. As he was discussing it with other people, they said, gee, you're a reputable guy. You should file a report. So he did, and registered it. When he was running for president in 1976, he was one of the first to say, if I become president, I would be interested in releasing the UFO files. He said, I will never make fun of any person who says I saw a UFO, because I'm one of them. Okay. A very admirable thing to do back in 1976. So some new information came out in a podcast from a guy by the name of Eric Davis. He's an astrophysicist and a UFO investigator about another incident in the annals of Jimmy Carter. Uh, there has been rumors that he was briefed on UFOs and on alien contact in while he was president, and uh, more evidence is coming out. Davis has more evidence, he says, of what happened there. I think there was the story everybody hears is that Jimmy Carter was given a piece of paper about aliens, and after he was finished reading it, he put his head down and he wept.
Yeah.
That's a nice, that's a nice film story, the movie story. But this is real stuff here. This is so he says that the meeting took place uh, in the National Security Council conference room in the White House, and then moved to the Oval Office. Uh, and Carter was informed about classified information on alien contacts. There is a list of the attendees in that room in the Carter Museum at the Carter Presidential Library in Georgia. And if you go and you look at it, two names have been redacted. The names and what their jobs were, or any other information, all redacted. Again, suspicious as far as conspiracies are concerned. One of the people who was not there but who was informed about it was Alonzo McDonald. He was a senior staff member of the Carter White House. He confirmed that the briefing did take place, and then a few years later he denied it. So again, feeds into conspiracies. In 1977, there was another meeting. Now, this I did not know about, and I've done some research on the presidents and their UFOs. Carter met with another world leader. Now, lower level world leader. His name was Eric Gary, who at the time was Prime Minister of Grenada. So he's down on the list, but nonetheless a world leader. And what this guy Gary wanted to do, and he wanted Carter's support, he wanted to go to the United Nations and in front of the entire world say, well, I want to create an international investigation led by the United Nations into UFOs. My question when I heard that is, what if he had done that? What if in 1977 he had done that? The guy lost, worse than any president in recent and probably all of history in the United in 1980 to Ronald Reagan. What if he had released UFO files? Would have it made a difference in the election? So I have a little bit of personal information on that because I happened to meet another presidential candidate just 2 years ago who did just that. His name is Dennis Kucinich, and he was the mayor of Cleveland for a long time. He's been a congressman. He was running for president in 1992, I think he was running for president. There was a debate, 2008, I'm sorry, later than that, 2008. During the debate host said, Mr. Kucinich, we want to talk to you about the UFO sighting that actress Shirley MacLaine said that you had, and she described in her book. So this is the first time anybody's heard about it unless they had read the book. And it says he had a close sighting in Washington State where he lived, where she lived. He said that it was extremely moving. Smell of roses drove him to a balcony. He looked out. He saw a gigantic triangular craft, silent and observing him. So he admitted during this debate that yes, he did see it. Yes, he told it to Shirley MacLaine. It was a true thing. The poor guy was kicked summarily out of the presidential campaign. Reporters just mocked him mercilessly. Voters, other candidates, and he was out. How do I know this? 2 years ago, I'm sitting at a picnic, and politicians like to come to this was the church picnic. They like to come and campaign. So who comes walking up to me randomly? We'd never met before in our lives, but Dennis Kucinich. So he was campaigning for office. And I said, I told him who I was. I was working for Mysterious Universe at the time. I said, I write about UFOs. I know all about your experience. I actually campaigned for him while I was in Texas, so I'm a fan. I said, can you tell me anything more? And he says, all I can say is that it really did happen. He said, it ruined my career. He says, and yet here we are. Jimmy Carter, Jimmy Carter saw a UFO. George W. Bush saw a UFO. Ronald Reagan saw a UFO. Um, and President Trump has been talking about releasing the files for ages. So he said, "Why me? Why did it ruin his career?" And that answered the question to me. I don't think it would have helped Jimmy Carter at all. That's the end result. It was far too early in the UFO disclosure movement to have helped him. Uh, but there you go. A president with a really internal, deep security intelligence briefings on UFOs and alien encounters with alleged, list of attendees and people who said they were there. And wow, there's no smoking gun yet, but that's the kind of thing where it sounds like we're getting awfully close to an answer there.
Yeah, I mean, I was aware of the story of Carter weeping into his hands, and who knows what he read if that is a true account. Before we delve into it, it's worth whether he talks about UFOs or not. It's worth time considering how different the world might have. I'm not saying Reagan was necessarily bad, but how different the world might have been if Carter had got that second term.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to talk about the October surprise and the Iranian hostages, which undoubtedly worked in Reagan's favor. So we'll leave that there. But yeah, I mean, Carter was a nice guy, and I know nice guys doesn't necessarily translate in ruling the world, but this guy was still building houses for people when he was ill. So he's certainly near the top of this for nice guy president. But yeah,
and a scientist. He was a scientist as well. I want to mention that he was a nuclear scientist. Not just aware of. He didn't take a course in college. He actually had a degree. So yeah,
certainly speaking from an educated point of view as well, which is fascinating. But it does make you wonder. I mean, I know Clinton was big on this, wasn't he, when he was running? I'll release those files. The same kind of thing. Obama, not with as much as this, but he kind of mentioned it. So it does make you wonder: are they briefed, and do they just at that point have that understanding that? No, I can't actually do this, So it is interesting. Reagan, although he never kind of talked about releasing files, at least not to my knowledge, he did have an interest in this stuff. I mean, his own sightings. But, in his diaries, which were released, years after he was president, he was talking about all sorts of stuff in there, about how he'd had briefings from people saying that he'd got spacecraft in the atmosphere, shuttles that could carry 300 people, and stuff like that. And he also had some conversations with Steven Spielberg, which Spielberg, he did say did happen, but where Reagan essentially turned around to Spielberg after the premiere of E.T. and said, we both know how close to the truth that is. So it makes you wonder what presidents know, for sure. And it's interesting stuff because, again, we'll get onto this in a moment, but, this drive for disclosure and what is known behind closed doors, it's been going on for decades and decades. But it's interesting stuff. And what I do find interesting is, even though these things happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, Carter was in office, 50 years ago it must have been, there's still new information to come to light even today, whether it's through declassified files, somebody coming forward. So we've not heard the end of any of this, really. It's still lots to come out, I think, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. It was before the end of the Cold War. So what could the implications have been on that as well? Before the first Iraq invasion, before just so many things that happened since that time that could have been impacted by that. It boggles the mind. It causes you to think way too much.
We were talking about earlier, you're right there, Paul.
But I think if we didn't think way too much, we wouldn't have such a fun show like we're having. And I know you've got another great story lined up for us here. Fill me in.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a return to our will they, won't they running alien saga, basically. We've spoken about Trump over the past few weeks, we've spoken about Obama and his comments. Well, now Steven Spielberg's weighed in on everything. He's had a few things to say. And he's basically along the same lines as Obama. I think his exact phrase was he has a strong suspicion that we're not alone on Earth right now. Now, similar to the Bigfoot thing that we spoke about in the opening, people have taken this and they've ran with it, some of them, and they're still running with it. They're kind of convinced that Spielberg is going to be his upcoming movie, Disclosure. Is it Disclosure Day? It's coming out in the summer. And some people, some are convinced that it's through this movie that some kind of disclosure is going to happen, that Spielberg's going to be turning as something that we don't know. And I find that really quite fascinating because although he undoubtedly does put stuff into his movies, it's not necessarily, I don't believe, a secret message. It's just a sign of a solid researcher who's got a good, solid team of researchers working under him. I mean, people point to the Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and there's numerous things in there that are based on real events. And so people that kind of put two and two together and come up with 15, I think. They're like, I said, well, he knew about this. He's got inside information. No, he's just done his own work. That's all he's done. I'm not knocking the guy either. I think he's great. But, I mean, I don't think Disclosure Day is by any stretch of the imagination some kind of disclosure. It's just a film. Now, the ideas within that film, all right, that's different. That may lead to something in terms of people picking stuff up and running with it. But he's always, as well as being a filmmaker, he's also a marketer. He knows how to market his movies. He knows the right things to say. Oh, yeah. He was even quoted as saying that when Obama made his comments, his exact words were, "This is going to be great for the new movie." So he knows this, and I'm not knocking him. He's right. So. Yeah, but it's not just Spielberg that keeps the aliens and UFOs in the news recently. We've had the chair of the Task Force for Declassification of Federal Services, and she's called Anna Paulina Luna, and she stated publicly that she was saying they're very serious, is what she said, about releasing this information. She claims that there's not just documents and files, there's also video footage that defies explanation. And she went on to say that, again, quoting her directly here, we're going to get loads of cool stuff. Now, okay, that's not necessarily very presidential or very, articulate maybe, but she's reinforcing that something is coming. Recently, as well, to add into this, the website alien.gov has been registered recently by the Trump administration. There could be various reasons for that. It could be nothing more than just pure business and a way to make money. That could be all that's down to. But then add another twist into the mix. A congressman from Tennessee, I think we mentioned him before, Tim Burchett, he's been saying that it's his concern and belief that whistleblowers are not coming forward because they fear being murdered, and that some of them might already have come to a nefarious end. So ultimately, Paul, we keep trying to steer away from this, but we're kind of being dragged back in because it's getting spoken about left, right, and centre, basically. So, and I'm sure you've looked into this too, because I'm sure you've got some thoughts on all of this, because it just
sure. Wasn't that many years ago there was a senator. Most of the politicians are representatives, the lower level of the House, as you would call it. But Senator Harry Reid, who was the Senate Majority Leader, so he's the head of our Senate. He was a strong proponent of UFO disclosure, and he was based in Nevada, which is where Area 51 was. So he had, George Knapp, a big investigative researcher, is based there. So he had a ready mouthpiece. That he was good information for him, and George would feed him information as well. So that was a good relationship. But Harry Reid really did a great job of moving the ball forward in UFO and research and disclosure, with the U.S. government being a part of it. And again, as I like, from more of a scientific than a paranormal direction. The alien.gov thing, boy, that get a lot of press in the U.S. All the conspiracy theorists were up in arms about that. Something's going to happen. But yeah, Paulina Luna, she's cursed with a terrible name for someone who is investigating UFOs. But she and with the political discourse in the United States and the problems that we have. She unfortunately does some things that lessen her credibility, but she is really at the head, along with Tim Burchett, another one, at the head of revealing more information and demanding from, I don't know who they're demanding it from, I guess from the body of Congress, to release this information and give it to us. Let the public have it. She admits, as you said, I know, I've seen this. She lists the things she's seen. But the other thing that you said, and they are afraid, or at least they say they're afraid that something is going to happen to them. And no one's talking about the men in black, which I think would make it, less credible. But they're saying that we are in danger. The more we talk about this, and the more whistleblowers talk about this, they are in danger. From who? I don't know. From the United States government, from foreign powers, from something else. Who knows? Who knows? But this is interesting times in government regulation, and then you throw in Steven Spielberg making money on it. God bless him. Not that he needs more money.
No.
But he's an excellent filmmaker, and again, I think that will help move the ball forward. As you said, maybe get more people interested. But please don't look at this like a documentary. It's not. It's a science fiction, a work of science fiction. Treat it that way. Enjoy yourself. Get a big box of popcorn and have a good time.
No, I completely agree, and I'm not knocking the notion that messages are placed in films. I do think that's a thing at times. Eyes Wide Shut's a good example of a little peek inside another world. But ultimately, these are all just fiction. You've got, as you say, you've got to treat it like that. And certainly with this Disclosure Day, it's just going to be a very good film, no doubt. But something that Spielberg or any other filmmaker might want to make a movie about in the near future is the Varginha incident in Brazil back in 1996. Now, this is enjoying its 30th anniversary. I mean, we speak a lot about towns and locations celebrating their cryptids and celebrating things like that. Well, this is kind of happening this year in and around the area in Brazil. There's a lot of talk about it now. I'll go through a real quick Reader's Digest version of what happened here. And if any guys want to read about this, I'll stick a link to an article in the description. But ultimately, on the 20th of January 1996, there was three sisters, 6-year-old Lillian de Silva, 14-year-old Valkyria, and 22-year-old Katia. They were walking in the woods, and they came into a clearing, and they saw what they described as a strange creature that was huddled against a crumbling wall. They said it was about 2 or 3 feet tall, had leathery brown skin, and a triangular-shaped head, which, bigger than it should have been for its body. So you've got a typical kind of alien description there. Rather than them being afraid, although they were certainly, cautious, they had the impression that the creature was scared of them, and they almost said that it almost seemed to try and make itself smaller, by leaning in against the wall. And what they did is they ran back home to report what they'd seen, and Katia, the oldest daughter, returned with the girl's mother, but the creature, it was gone. There was no sign of it. Unbeknownst to them, though, there had been other witnesses. When they ran off, the 3 girls, whether for effect or just because they were being silly or because of genuine fright, they screamed. Now, this alerted them to an elderly lady who was nearby with her granddaughter, and they were watching the area. And they said not long after the girls had left, a fire department truck arrived, and several firemen basically seemed to find this creature, and they bundled it into the fire truck. Now, it's important to note that in Brazil, the fire department comes under the same operations as the police. They essentially work for the police. So, inadvertently, the police have arrived there. The creature's whereabouts was unknown. There were other witnesses, though, and one of the most important was a lady called Aurelina Augusta. She said that she was woken at 1 a.m. In the early hours of January 20th. So that's about, the girls saw the creature in the afternoon. So we're talking a little over 12 hours before. She said she could hear cattle on local farms around her. They were agitated, they were bellowing. When she and her husband looked out of the window, they could see not only cattle almost stampeding, but like a cigar-shaped craft, she described it as, hovering overhead, moving, but moving as if it was damaged. And then just to confirm that, she said she could see smoke rising from this craft. Now, it's assumed that the object crashed somewhere in the woods and that at least one creature vacated it. However, when you could look at the records and what a lot of UFO researchers have turned up over the decades, there were calls to the fire department as early as 8:30 in the morning. One particular call saying that there was a strange figure roaming around in the woods. Now, there was reports up to 4 different creatures in total, not just the one. And these appeared at various times throughout the day of 20th January 1996. One of the people that was responsible for rounding up, or allegedly rounding up these creatures, was a chap called Mario Cherez, he was called. And he, whether on purpose or not, he physically touched one of the creatures with his bare hands. He started to feel ill a short time after this, and ultimately he died just short of a month later. His family ended up suing the local authorities. They were only told that his death was caused by exposure to hazardous chemicals. Local rumors suggest his death was caused by contact with this creature. Oh. So, it's something certainly strange certainly happened. The more you delve into this, there are reports of an entire wing of the hospital in Virginia being shut down and off limits to people. And that was for several days, that was as well. And then on the 23rd of January, so 3 days later, a military convoy left the hospital in complete secrecy, no information given whatsoever, and they went to a destination unknown, essentially. Nobody knows where they went, what they were carrying, or anything like that. Now, just to add a further twist to this, some reported an increased presence in the area of American agents, American military, undercover, obviously, in the days leading up to and the days after the incident, with some researchers suggesting that NORAD had actually tracked the object before it had crashed. Whether that's true or not, who knows? Now, as I say, it's a 30th anniversary, so the area, rightly, in my opinion, tapping into this. It's almost becoming like a modern folklore tale, even though there's ample evidence to suggest that it happened. But one of those people is a chap called Marco Antonio Reis. Now, he was a zoo director at the time of the incident, and he's come forward with further information saying that not only was the creature seen in and around the area at the time, or a strange creature anyway, he said 6 of the animals at the zoo all died of the most mysterious deaths, all different, but they all just died. There's no explanation. He doesn't know why. And it's interesting, again, we're in South America. We spoke about the Chupacabra. So, again, where there's a connection, I don't know. I don't think there is, but it is strange that essentially, even today, 30 years on, we've got people coming forward saying, look, this really did happen. So whether the Brazilian authorities took charge of this creature, whether it's still alive, whether it was passed to the Americans, if they were there, I don't know. But it's a well-known story in our world, Paul, but you would think this would be more well-known to the wider world in the way that Roswell is. So maybe someone does need to make a film about this incident. It is a fascinating case.
I agree with that, Marcus. I'm surprised, as you are, that someone hasn't, maybe not a Spielberg, but somebody lower at a lower level hasn't made it into a movie and given it the attention that sounds like it deserved. The thing about that incident that I like is that it was people, the witnesses are in the general public. Area 51, Roswell is the military. Rendlesham Forest, the military. Many of these are military witnesses, and the military takes the things off. In this particular case, it was the fire department and the police. So not necessarily not the military, but closer to the public. And then you've got the testimonies of the doctors and other people in the hospital. And the crowning thing is, as you said, 30 years later, this isn't happening with Roswell. 30 years later, there are new people coming in and saying, I have information, I saw this, I did this. And not just hearsay, not just circumstantial, but some of them are coming with stronger evidence. So if we could raise the money, maybe we could put that put that movie together.
Absolutely. As long as we shoot on location, Paul, then we can go and spend a
There
couple
you
of weeks.
go. That's right. Oh, very good. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd love to see that place. So yeah,
Yeah.
let's see if we can make that happen. But I mean, our last story, Paul, of this episode, it's been a fascinating episode. But this is a good one. This a disappearing sheep flock. What's this all about? Because
Oh, this story brings. I think it brings everything we've been talking about to all back together again. So, we talk about in our business, we talk about abductions, cattle abductions, and cattle mutilations. Those are the big thing, but mostly mutilation. Very seldom in the animal side, as opposed to the people, do we have entire flocks of animals or herds disappearing. But that happened in Norway recently. So there's two remote islands off the coast of Norway, Storbothildен and Verlingen. And I know I mispronounced them. I apologize to the residents there. But they've been raising sheep on these islands for years. Recently, within the past few years, not just individual sheep, but 20, 30 entire flocks of sheep are suddenly disappearing. And the farmers, obviously, the ranchers go looking for the sheep. They find nothing. They find no blood. They find no footprints. They find no track prints. There are no witnesses saying, "Oh yeah, we heard a boat come up and kidnap them." Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So the ranchers are baffled. The police are baffled. So this was in the news recently when one farmer reported 23 sheep missing. Another farmer reported 55 in the past 2 years. So they just don't know what to do, but they know they're losing money. They're losing money. They admit that they don't have closed circuit cameras because it's too expensive. The area is too remote, and also they don't have satellite connections because again they're too remote. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I think technology is advancing, but they're losing money. So if they could stop losing the money, I'm sure they would spend the money accordingly. So so I was thinking, well, this never happened with cattle. You never hear of a herd of cattle disappearing. And then I go looking, and sure enough, just last year in November, in Lowth, Colorado, a number of ranchers have started losing groups of portions of a herd of cattle just disappearing. Same thing, Marcus, same thing. 43, one of them said. Total of 187 over the period from November until now. That's a lot of cows.
Yeah.
So this is, again, it's a very remote plateau in Colorado, rugged country, hard for vehicles to get in. So, everybody says rustlers. It's hard enough for the ranchers to get up there to check on their herds, let alone rustlers. And again, no tracks, no physical evidence whatsoever, other than they just disappear. It's like there's a Waffle House and they walk into a Waffle House. So these stories of abductions reminded me, since I was working on stories about president, it reminded me of a story about President Dwight Eisenhower, who was president after World War II. After the war ended, he was elected president for 2 terms in the United States. There's well-known stories about him going to California while he was president under guise of a vacation or something, and then he made a mysterious trip. He kind of disappeared from the house where they were at for overnight, and they said the cover story was that he was eating chicken wings and chipped a tooth and needed emergency dental work. This is the president of the United States. This is the guy that helped end World War II. He doesn't need, he can tough it out. Yeah. So the story then is that no, he actually went to an Air Force base, what is now called Edwards Air Force Base, and not only met with aliens, but also saw alien bodies that were from a crash. And he allegedly signed, and this is what brings it all together, he signed something called the Greada Treaty, Greada, which is better known as the Eisenhower alien treaty. And that Eisenhower alien treaty, people say that it gave the extraterrestrials, it asked them to share advanced technology with us, which a lot of people believe we have. And in return, President Eisenhower said, you have limited access to taking a limited number of our cattle and our people too. So that's the story. Eisenhower agreed. In order to get the technology, he said, you can abduct our people, you can do experiments, you can do the same thing with cattle. And that story persists to this day, that that could be the reason for all these disappearances, even the missing people as well. So according to Timothy Good, who was a former Congress and Pentagon consultant, governments around the world, he just said this recently, governments around the world, not just Eisenhower, have been in regular contact with aliens doing things like this. But only Eisenhower made a treaty that we actually know about, or that has some substance to it, more than stories from any other country. That one always blows me away when I hear about it, because this is a guy who is, to this day, very few people were alive when he was president. He's still one of the most respected presidents of the United States. He's one of the most respected generals in the history of warfare. He's known around the world. Did he really do something like that? Here's a guy who made tough decisions when he was, during World War II, trying to stop the death of millions and millions of people worldwide. Maybe he makes that kind of decision in terms of dealing with aliens. Maybe he felt that he was going to be saving us by getting the technology. And it's a small price to pay for someone who sends people into battle knowing that they're going to die. If there's anybody who could make a decision like that, Eisenhower would be the guy. Have you heard that story before?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating one, like you say. I mean, it's been written about lots of times. I do believe there's a film in the making. I'm not sure how far along that is. But yeah, I mean, it's easy to dismiss this, and for people to dismiss that. I get that. But what I find interesting, depending on who you listen to and what accounts what sources you use, the reason he made that deal, some say, is because he was essentially told by these aliens, if you don't, we're hopping it over the Atlantic and we're going to the Soviets. And I don't word it like that, but that's essentially what they were told. And we're going to present them with the same deal. If that was true, let's just say that was true for a moment, then that's going to shift the balance of power immediately. Because you'll know this better than me, Paul. I am British, but the Americans, they weren't necessarily the superpower then. They were very much becoming that, but they were only just starting to kind of, how do I word this? Not enjoy the riches of the war, but it put a lot of money in American companies' pockets, building weapons, building planes, blah blah blah, and they were just about to become this superpower. But the one nation that could probably oppose that would have been the Soviet Union. China was not where they are today, for example. So if that is true, and he was presented with that, he's going to make that deal because he can't afford for the Soviets to get that upper hand. But lots of other things fall into place as well. I mean, the technological revolution kind of started, I would say, mid-50s, certainly throughout the 60s and into the 70s. So why is all this technology? Where does that come from? The best example, I feel, is the Bell transistor. There's no natural progression from this, what came before, to this, which is there now. It's just like bang, and it's there. So that's something that people highlight. The abductions started around, and all those cases before the 60s, but the abductions began early 60s, and they began to unfold increasingly as we got into 70s and 80s, with people saying that the aliens, whoever they were, they honoured their agreement to begin with, to return people only limited access. But as time goes on, they just basically kind of threw that deal out and started taking people off the wish. Who knows? So there's that. And we mentioned the cattle mutilations again. So that brings it back to the disappearing cattle. They began, as we said, in the late 60s in earnest. And certainly by the time we get to the 70s, around the same time as the alien abductions are increasing and ramping up, so do the cattle mutilations. So, yeah, regarding the Eisenhower thing, I think, yeah, we need to treat it with that pinch of salt, like we do most of these things, but it's not as outlandish. The circumstances are outlandish, but the deal that was allegedly made isn't, because he's not necessarily, as you say, he's not putting American citizens in danger per se. He's really removing them from a greater danger of having a Soviet Union, which could have the upper hand over not just the Americans, the entire Western world. So there's that. Regarding the disappearing cattle, I mean, you would think the authorities would look into this, because unless Westerns have been lying to me all this time, cattle rustling, you get hanged for that back in the day. I'm not saying we should be hanging people for doing this. I'm not saying we should have a death penalty at all, actually, but that's another discussion. I think you would think they would treat it seriously. You would think, these are animals that are worth a lot of money. It can cripple a ranch or a farm if they go missing, and often does. So, yeah, it doesn't surprise me so much it's happening. It surprises me that maybe the authorities aren't treating it as, and maybe they are on a ground level. We just don't hear about. I don't know, but yeah, you would think they'd want to get to the bottom of this, because how on earth do 6, 7, 8, 10 cows or 10 horses just disappear? Yeah. But they do.
They do.
It's a strange one.
They do. Wow. Yeah. Everything's disappearing, Marcus. If you just listen to this show, it seems like everything's disappearing. The government is involved. Aliens are involved. We need more data. That sums it up right there.
I think you're right. I think we do need more data. And I've just said before, Paul, it could only happen on Earth, my friend. It could only happen on Earth.
There we go. That's exactly right, Marcus. Another great series of stories, and you're right. It could only happen here, and we're here to report on it.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Oh, Paul, thank you very much for joining me as always. It has been
a fantastic
chat. And thank you guys for joining us as always. Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments. Make sure you tell everybody you can about us. Make sure you check out Me Time for the Mind. Check out Paul's stuff on Substack. And make sure you subscribe to our channel, most importantly. Until next time, though, goodbye and take care.
Bye-bye.